What's up, guys? Welcome back to Harry Plays here. Today we're going to be reacting to Wolfie VGC's The Death of Landorus. So, before I introduce Wolfie, which you guys probably already know who Wolfie is, he's a competitive. Let me just do this. Wolfie is a competitive player who won his championship a while ago. I don't know if he won another one since then, but he makes videos about like VGC and like the landscape of Pokemon. So today we're going to be reacting to the death of Landorus. One thing you should know about me is I like competitive Pokemon. I've never played competitive Pokemon because I only got to really be back into it in the Switch. In the Switch, I tried to get into competitive Pokemon, but it was so annoying. So like Sword and Shield, and then Scarlet and Violet came out, and I was like, this is too hard to get into. So I did not get into competitive Pokemon. I tried Pokemon Showdown, did not like that either. So I just dropped it altogether. So, but one thing I do know is that Landorus is known to be the most annoying Pokemon in the VGC. So let's just see this video and see what Wolfie has to say. By the way, this picture is hilarious.
Over a decade ago, the Pokemon Company made a mistake.
I love his
They
editing,
released a
by the way.
Pokemon
His editing is so
powerful,
good.
It would not only go on to dominate the game, but its absurd strength would make
That's
it
a
almost
nice
mandatory
Rayquaza.
on every single competitive team. A Pokemon that had it all: stats, move pool.
I know
ability,
that
typing.
in Shady Penguin's current draft league, he has a Landorus. It's doing pretty well for him.
Everything a Pokemon could want, Landorus had, and then it disappeared. How could this happen? How could a Pokemon so powerful that just showing a picture of one to a player from 2015 would cause them to pass out on the spot
This is true.
and just vanish?
He's not
Maybe
wrong.
you think I'm not being completely honest, that the reports of Landorus's death were greatly exaggerated. Well, I recently entered the biggest official Pokemon tournament of all time.
And let me guess, nobody used Landorus, huh? That's
And do you want to guess what Landorus's best placement was? Top 256. But in order to figure out what happened to Landorus Therian, we need to understand what makes it so strong in the first place.
That's
Let's
actually a
start with
huge
a
fall
simple
off.
distinction. There are technically two Landoruses: the
Therian.
incarnate or base form and the Therian form, which is the focus of our
Therian?
video.
Throw
When Landorus was
Therian.
first introduced, it was only available in its incarnate form, and it didn't see a ton of play. But then in Pokemon Black and White 2, they added this stupid mini game you had to download on your 3DS, where you had to use the gyroscope and the outer
I never owned a 3DS, so I never had to do this.
cameras to chase a bunch of little orbs around your house, and you can only play so much each day for some reason. I'm not making any of this up, by the way. This was a legitimate part of being a competitive player a decade ago. Anyway, after like 2 weeks, you would eventually unlock the reveal.
That's why,
and in doing so, you could transform all three.
like, I've heard other YouTubers talk about this, but like being a competitive Pokemon player must be a pain in the, you know, because setting up teams takes so long. I know this is not nothing to do with the video, but setting up teams takes way too long, man.
Genies into their Therian forms. Changing Tornadus, Thundurus, or Landorus from incarnate to Therian form has a couple effects. Their move pool and base stat total remain unaffected, but their ability and the stats themselves change. Tornadus Therian and Thundurus Therian are pretty widely agreed upon as being downgrades compared to their incarnate forms. This was not the case for Landorus. While Landorus Incarnate was a niche offensive pick at the time, Landorus Therian immediately became one of the most used Pokemon when it was introduced in 2013. But if the stat total and the moves didn't change, what caused such a major shift? The most obvious change is Landorus Therian's ability. While Landorus Incarnate has access to the abilities Sand Force and Sheer
Intimidate,
Force, which can boost its damage
right?
output,
It's Intimidate.
Landorus Therian has Intimidate. Intimidate, for anyone unaware, is
like I know, like Incineroar, who's also another Intimidate Pokemon, it's also widely used. Intimidate got to be really overpowered, huh? Like I get it, I get why it's overpowered, but I think that's why they made stuff like Wo-Chien, where it's only Intimidate only works if it's on the field, which is I think it's kind of more overpowered. Man, we'll see.
Single best abilities in all of competitive Pokemon, if not the very best. Every time an Intimidate user hits the field, it lowers the attack stats of both opposing Pokemon. And with competitive Pokemon being double battles, this is a massive deal. After just one Intimidate, a Pokemon's attack stat is 2/3 of what it was to start. And after 2 Intimidates, that's down to 50%. Getting to reduce your opponent's damage
Double
output
Intimidators?
so much as a passive benefit to just switching in, and being able to do this multiple times per game to boot, makes Intimidate users extremely valuable. But Landorus's ability change doesn't fully explain its meteoric
But why
rise
isn't
to
Sheer
success.
Force? Why isn't Sheer Force good on Landorus though? So like, let's just look up Landorus. Landorus, like, does it not have moves to use a Sheer Force? Like, if you guys don't know what Sheer Force says, so like, say if it's like a move like Crunch, who has a chance of lowering defense. Instead of lowering, it'll cut off the lower defense, but it'll add 30% to the power. So now let's see. It's a move pool. Let's just say Gen 5. Let's say Outrage doesn't have anything. Oh, Outrage has confusion. But to yourself, Hammer Arm does this, so that's 30% to Hammer Arm. Stone Edge, no. Fissure, no. Earthquake, no. Rock Slide, no. So Red SSC, so really it's only Hammer Arm. And Existensory, and then how about you? Bulldoze. So yeah, it doesn't have many moves to make use of its Sheer Force. Okay, that probably makes sense on why Intimidate is much better then.
Yes, and we need to understand its rise if we want to learn about its fall. Another piece of the puzzle is its stats. Let's compare the two tigers side by side.
Oh,
you can see they
I
have
didn't
identical HP,
know speed
defense,
lowered
and
that
special
much.
defense stats. But Landorus T trades 10 speed and 10 special attack for a whopping 20 attack. For context, this puts Landorus T at nearly the same attack stat as Zacian, Groudon, and Rayquaza.
Oh.
And even though it technically has the same defensive stats as Landorus Incarnate, in practice,
Didn't know that.
it feels much tankier because of Intimidate effectively making its physical bulk at least 50% better. Okay, so Landorus T not only has one of the best abilities in the entire franchise, it also has some of the best stats of any Pokemon that's not on the cover of a game.
Okay.
But we're not done talking about Landorus's strengths yet. Let's talk about its typing. As a ground and flying type, Landorus has only 2 weaknesses. Water and ice, which is a quadruple weakness. You might think that this quadruple weakness to ice is the secret to
No,
Landorus'
because
demise.
Pokemon don't use ice type Pokemon. Competitive Pokemon users don't use ice type Pokemon unless they're running Ice Beam.
But this major drawback comes with some pretty nice benefits. In exchange for just these 2 weaknesses, Landorus gets 3 resistances and, importantly, 2 immunities.
I didn't think about that.
Best offensive
I didn't think about ground being immune.
Ground and electric. This is an amazing defensive spread, but it doesn't stop there. Offensively, with ground and flying moves, Landorus hits 8 types for super effective damage, with no single type in the game being able to resist both ground and flying.
I'm wondering why
These 2 types
he's
have
not being
amazing
used anymore
offensive
then.
synergy because ground moves are resisted by bug and grass types, and flying hits those for super effective damage, whereas flying attacks are resisted by rock, steel, and electric type Pokemon, all of whom take super effective damage from ground moves. This is where Landorus runs into its first problem. It doesn't learn a reliable flying type attack, or it didn't learn one when it was first introduced. But we'll talk more about flying moves later.
Okay.
For now, let's talk about the other attacks Landorus learns. Actually, before we talk about Landorus's moves, let's talk about the sponsor of today's video.
Yeah, let's one.
Bye.
Bye.
I'm gonna take a wild guess here and say that some of you are probably very interested in cool stuff that's exclusive to Japan.
I'm very
And that's
interested.
where
I'm very
Buyee
interested.
comes
I have
Buyee is a proxy shipping service in Japan.
Stuff behind me.
What that means is that
Okay.
places that tend to only ship within Japan, such as Amazon Japan, Yahoo Japan, Rakuten, and more, Buyee will purchase whatever item you want for you
And then
have
send it
sent
to me?
their warehouse, and then mail it internationally to you.
Okay.
This is a big deal. By using Buyee, you can buy anything from Japan without having to go through scalpers who jack up the price. I was just in Japan this past summer, and I saw a lot of really cool stuff. I bought this art book.
Yo,
from anime
time to buy me a a plushie, a pillow,
and these coasters
a
from
a
another
a
anime
Gardevoir
I
pillow.
It's exciting to me to think that I might not have to miss out on
Gotta get me the
products
God of War
just
pillows, you know?
because I don't live in Japan. If Bai sounds like something you might be interested in, I have good news. Sign up using the link in the description and get 10% off your first purchase. Thanks again to Bai for
Use the link in the
this
description,
video.
guys.
You might think that, considering everything Pokemon has given to Landorus thus far, they'd show a little restraint with its move pool. If you thought that,
Nope.
you'd be dead wrong. Landorus's move pool when it was first introduced.
I thought when I was looking through his move pool is good. Just can't use sheer force, but his move pool is still good.
Absurd. For starters, it gets access to Earthquake.
Earthquake!
And if
Earthquake!
you've ever played a Pokemon game, I probably don't need to tell you how good Earthquake is. But it's a ground type, so of course it gets Earthquake. What's really shocking is the coverage moves they decided to give to Landorus. Superpower, an incredibly powerful fighting type attack. Knock Off, a dark type move that removes
I think knockoff. It was banned, not banned. It wasn't in Scarvy for a while, right? Until like the latest DLC. And I get why. It's super annoying.
Item, Rock Slide, probably the most infamous.
It gotta be super annoying in singles, because say you knock out the item, takes like half damage, then a Pokemon can be like, okay, I gotta switch. But if they use knock off again, that means you have two items. If they do switch, that's two items gone. Yeah, that's super annoying.
Of Landorus's attacks, thanks to the chaos it causes with the tie flinch chance, and most importantly, for some godforsaken reason, the bug type move, U-turn. Does this thing look like a bug to you all? Bug is arguably the worst type in the game. So why is Landorus getting a bug type move such a big deal? Well, it isn't the coverage that makes U-turn strong, it's the effect. When U-turn connects with a target, the user is switched out. It might not sound very exciting, but this one move takes Landorus from completely unbalanced to just plain unfair. This type of manual switching is extremely valuable in competitive Pokemon because it allows you to scout for what your opponent wants to do and then decide which Pokemon you want to send in after you've seen what your opponent has chosen for the turn. It also allows you to more easily maneuver your Pokemon. And this is an especially big deal.
I
with
saw the
Landorus
paralysis. I had to
because
be
of its
frustrated.
handy little
Is that the
ability
same guy?
This is an side for the turn.
I'm just being
It also
racist.
allows you to more easily maneuver your Pokemon. And this is an especially big deal with
Yeah, I'm
Landorus
just racist.
because of its handy little ability that activates every time it hits the field and its sky-high attack stat. U-turn allows Landorus to come in, intimidate the opponent, and then easily switch out again while still doing damage and scouting for what the opponent's counterplay is. And even though Bug
I really love doubles, by the way, compared to singles. It's just it's really hard to get into. Like, it's super hard to get into.
isn't a super good type generally,
I was watching a Patterns video, or I think it was a reaction, and he was like, "You should make it so that it's like showdown. Like Pokemon should make a showdown system." I don't know if they'll ever do it, but if they do it, oh my god, I would be right back into it.
actually great for Landorus, as for a while, the most popular Pokemon that was immune to ground-type moves was Cresselia, a Pokemon weak to Bug. There's a running joke in the community that Charizard is Pokemon's favorite child. And there is some truth to that. But
Say
when I look
Landorus.
at everything that Landorus was given, I'm not so sure anymore. The first year that Landorus Therian was legal was 2013. During the final year of Black and White 2's competitive circuit.
Everyone used it.
But despite being one of the most dominant Pokemon for the entire year, it actually didn't win the World Championships. In large part because the winning team chose to use Mamoswine instead as its ground type of choice, thanks to its ability to one-hit KO Landorus and Thundurus. Despite missing out in the victory, Landorus still plays.
Is Thunder still good, guys? I don't know how good Thundurus is. Oh, number 4. Okay.
Entire tournament.
Cresselia?
For a debut performance.
Cresselia being number
Wasn't
1
good
is
enough for
kind of
Landorus,
crazy.
though, and he was hungry for redemption. And he'd get it 2 years later, the next time he became legal.
Ugh,
The
Boston.
World Championships in 2015 were dominated by Landorus Therian. Though dominated might be an understatement. Of the
Everyone
top
used
8
it
teams,
too.
Landorus was present on
Damn.
every single one.
Yo, all
and
these
was
teams are the
number one
same.
Most used Pokemon
Look at that,
in
wait,
the entire
wait.
on every it might be
Look
an
at these. Look at
understatement.
this.
Of the top
Look, Kangas.
8 teams, Landorus
Yo,
was present on every single
competitive
one,
Pokemon had
and
to
was
be
the
really
number
boring
one
back
most
then,
used
right? Because
Pokemon in
they're
the
all the same
entire
thing.
tournament. It's hard to imagine Landorus Therian going from such an incredible peak to completely unused. In fact, Landorus Therian might be the only Pokemon to ever have 100% representation in the top 8 of the World Championship. Though I'm
Damn.
not entirely sure.
That-
But our
I feel
story
bad for
isn't
competitive
over
players
yet.
then.
This tale is about Landorus's demise, and in 2015, Landorus was the king. Next year, in 2016, Landorus fell off hard. Its best placement at the World Championships was
I wonder why.
16th,
Wait, what year? What's
and there were only
2016?
5 Landorus total
Was
in the
that-
entire tournament. A steep drop-off compared to the
Saturn
43 used the prior year, and even more steep when you consider that Worlds 2016 was meaningfully bigger than Worlds 2015. This was the first time it truly seemed that Landorus could bleed. So what happened in just one short year? The short answer is that the power level increased a lot, because 2016 was something called a restricted format, meaning some of the strongest Pokemon in the game became legal. Landorus's matchup against Primal Kyogre was really bad, and it wasn't that good against Pokemon like Xerneas, Rayquaza, or Yveltal. It didn't help that Bronzong was used much more than ever before, thanks to its good matchup against Xerneas and ability to set Trick Room. And of course, there was also Landorus's one major...
It's always so cool that you bring out Pokemon just for one Pokemon. Like earlier, he said he brought out Mamoswine just for Landorus, and now he's saying they brought Bronzong just for Xerneas.
It doesn't learn a good flying type move. With no way of using its flying type offensively, Landorus couldn't get around Pokemon like Amoonguss, Hitmontop, and Scrafty. And then Pokemon Sun and Moon
so it's
came
X
out,
and Y.
and Landorus
Interesting.
wasn't in the game. Well, at first. 2017's rule set didn't allow the Genie, but in 2018, Landorus was back. And this time, he had a new tool. Sun and Moon's
I didn't know they did
mechanic
that.
was Z moves. Extremely powerful once per battle attacks that turned a Pokemon's regular move into a supercharged version.
And they gave him a good
often
flying
close
type
to
move.
twice as strong as its base counterpart. And that meant for the first time ever, Landorus was actually able to make use of its flying typing offensively.
Besides
As
that.
with Z moves, the mediocre Fly was transformed into Supersonic Sky Strike. With a new tool in its belt, Landorus would go on to win all 3 international level tournaments during the year, as well as countless regional level events. I myself won a regional using Landorus Therian as a special attacker on my Charizard X team. It looked like Landorus's victory at the World
good job, Wolfie.
Championships was all but assured, but it didn't happen. Landorus once again placed 2nd and 3rd, but just like in
But
2013,
2nd and 3rd is
it
still
failed
good.
to bring home the title. The Pokemon standing in its way this time, though, wasn't Mamoswine, and it wasn't even a ground type. This Pokemon was far more sinister, and would be the single biggest factor in Landorus's demise.
Really? Incineroar? To Lando's demise, though? It's gonna be something else, isn't it? Oh, okay.
Incineroar.
Never mind.
2018 didn't only mark the year Landorus would arrive in Alola, it also marked the first year that Incineroar reached full power, as it finally had access to its hidden abilities starting partway through the
Intimidate,
year.
yeah.
And for anyone lucky enough to not know what Incineroar's hidden ability is already, allow me to be the bearer of bad news. It's Intimidate. With Incineroar's entry into the scene, Landorus for the first time had actual competition. Offensively, Landorus is the superior Pokemon. Its ground and
But
flying typing
I'm
are
so
better at hitting
wondering
things for big damage than Incineroar's
how this is
fire
gonna
and
work.
dark typing. And its base stats allow it to be both faster and harder hitting. But the thing is, Incineroar isn't supposed to be an offensive Pokemon. It instead
a
excels
stall.
at supporting its team. And even though it doesn't do as much damage as Landorus, it more than makes up for it in other ways. Incineroar is tankier than
I'm telling you, the
Landorus.
editing is so
Its
good in this
typing is
video.
better defensively,
Or in his video.
especially because it doesn't have a single quadruple weakness. It gets access to the move,
Wait.
especially because it doesn't have a single
Okay, immunity, but it takes what neutral effective. Oh, it has a lot of resistances too. Like that, like water is pretty prominent. Fighting and ground is pretty prominent. So that's why I'm like, why didn't it do well?
quadruple weakness.
Huh.
It gets access to the move Fake Out, one of the best
Yeah.
supporting moves of all time. And just like Landorus, it gets access to U-Turn. But somehow,
Ooh.
it's even more useful on Incineroar than it is on Landorus. That's because when you're using one of these manual switching moves, one of the main advantages that I didn't mention earlier is that switching out after your opponent has already attacked with both of their Pokemon for the turn means you can bring in one of your own Pokemon without any risk
And
of
something
taking
that's
damage.
faster,
One of
and
the
yeah.
biggest drawbacks to switching normally is that whatever you switch in can take massive damage if you aren't careful.
'Cause you're going
But
first.
A slow and bulky U-turn Pokemon can sponge any damage itself and then let your offensive trailer Pokemon come in for free. It isn't as relevant with Landorus because it doesn't really have the bulk to be making too much use of this most of the time. But you know who does have the bulk? Incineroar. For
Really?
the first time ever, Landorus was in trouble. In fact, Incineroar was strictly better at repeatedly intimidating down opponents than Landorus was, oftentimes managing to switch in 4 or 5 times in a single match.
That could be
compared
so
to Landorus's
annoying,
2
man.
or 3. And this
I'd
ultimately
be super
led to
annoyed.
Incineroar defeating Landorus in the finals of the World Championship. An extremely ominous omen for the Earthen Genie. The following year, Incineroar would take over completely, as the rules once again shifted to allow for restricted Pokemon. Incineroar's absurd bulk allowed it to be a much more
14
valuable
versus 17
Pokemon
seed?
against these superpowered threats. And its dark typing was invaluable against the newly introduced Solgaleo, Lunala, and Ultra Necrozma. Out of 78 teams in the World Championship, Incineroar was present on 65, a usage percentage of
Did you
over
see that?
83%.
How many
Would you like to guess how many
Incineroars?
teams Landorus was present on?
Like 1 or 2?
0.
Oh,
Not a single
wow.
person at the World Championships thought Landorus could do it. Landorus had less usage than Ditto and Salazzle.
Wow.
It wasn't enough for Incineroar to just take Landorus's job. This sadistic cat wanted to do even more damage. See, Incineroar usage was the highest any Pokemon had ever been over the course of history. Even the year where Landorus was present on every single team in the top 8, its overall usage was only 57% in the tournament,
Okay.
a way lower number than Incineroar's 83%. And the
65
developers
people
over at
use it?
Pokemon headquarters noticed. They saw
Noticed?
how powerful Incineroar was, and going into Sword and Shield, they realized that something had to change.
They nerfed it?
So they buffed Incineroar.
Huh, what do they do?
In my over 2 decades being
But
a Pokemon fan, this is probably the single most baffling decision I have ever seen the Pokemon Company make. Incineroar was given a new move, Parting Shot, which is just like U-turn, except instead of doing a little damage, the target's attack and special
Intimidate
attack stats are
plus
lower.
Parting Shot.
For a defensive
Oh,
Pokemon
that's
like
kind
Incineroar,
of
this is a
crazy.
strict upgrade and would cause
That's so
Incineroar to be
crazy.
better than ever before.
Because it's not only lowering its attack now, it's also so it's going to be -2 attack and then -1 special attack. That's
Landorus'
crazy.
biggest competitor wasn't enough for the Pokemon Company. Going into Sword and Shield, they reworked several old abilities so that they were no longer affected by Intimidate. These include Inner Focus, Scrappy, Oblivious, and Own Tempo. Sword and Shield also introduced Dynamax, giving some physical attackers a way to offset Intimidate, with Max Knuckle giving an attack boost. This generation would also introduce Urshifu, an absolute nightmare of a Pokemon who not only is faster than Landorus, but its signature move always crits.
Surging
With
Strikes
critical
is
hits ignoring
so
Intimidate
busted.
completely, this was yet another major threat to Landorus. Just like in Sun and Moon, Landorus wasn't legal during the first format of the new generation. But due to the pandemic, both Worlds 2020 and 2021 were canceled. So we can't say too much about them. It seemed like Landorus's only shot at redemption would be in 2022, the restricted format of Sword and Shield.
Yeah, so I didn't realize Sword and Shield went that far,
These
went that long.
formats have never been kind to Landorus. But things somehow weren't looking as bad as you might expect. In fact, Dynamax was even better for Landorus than Z-moves had been, as Max Airstream was
wonder how
one
many
of the
people
best
use it
max
this time.
moves in the game, raising both the user and their partner's speed stats. And unlike Z-moves, which only let Landorus use a flying move once per battle, Dynamax lasted for 3 turns. Max Quake was a great max move as
I'm glad they got rid of
increasing
Dynamax
its
though,
team's
can't
special
even lie.
defense, pairing extremely well with Landorus's Intimidate ability. And especially
So I forgot
useful
Sword and Shield's
ability to
attack
have
kind of gets
with
so much better,
Station
way
and
better,
Groudon running
way
around.
better.
Of course, Incineroar was still here, and it was far and away the better Intimidate user. But Landorus still found some success, especially when paired with Kyogre. Landorus placed second at both international tournaments, despite not being especially popular overall. And when the World Championships rolled around, there was a question in the air. Would Landorus be able to do it? Could
Yes.
it dethrone the king and once again claim the title?
Actually, no.
Landorus's best finish
Incineroar,
was 6th,
yeah.
and there were a handful of Landorus in the top 16 as well. This is a totally respectable performance, but for the once
Incineroar.
king of the game, it can't help but feel a little lackluster compared to the heights that Landorus once
I forgot
reached.
this is a
But
video about
unfortunately for
Landorus and not
Landorus,
about Incineroar, I can't lie.
Incineroar was still causing problems. At the 2022 World Championships, Incineroar was used on 83 teams, with a total usage of 74%, and once again took home the title. While its usage wasn't quite as high as the year prior, it was clear that the Pokemon Company still had some work to do to get Incineroar in line. Scarlet and Violet added several more tools to help players manage Intimidate. Most notably is the item Clear Amulet, which allows any Pokemon to effectively have the Clear Body ability, making them immune to Intimidate as well as all other external stat drops. Most notably, Kingambit and Annihilate, who have the ability Defiant, powering them up whenever any of their stats is dropped, and Dondozo, who has the Oblivious ability, making it immune to Intimidate. But once again, Landorus wasn't in the game for most of 2023, the first year of Scarlet and Violet's competitive rule set. I say most because, in a shocking twist, for the first time ever, the World Championships would use a different rule set than the entire rest of the format.
Oh, really?
And suddenly,
I didn't know
Landorus was added to the mix for this final and most important event of the year. And this time, for the first time in 6 years, Incineroar was not in the game. For the third generation in a row, Landorus was able to use the new mechanic to get around its lack of flying type moves. With Terra Fly and Terra Blast, Landorus had a reliable flying type move that could be used until it fainted, without a timer like Dynamax and Z-Moves had. And with this new tool and no wrestling cats in sight, for the first time in 8 years, Landorus would go on to win the World Championships. Despite being one of the most infamous and strongest Pokemon of all time, this was only Landorus' second win at Worlds. But it very well might be its last for quite some time. Although Landorus would go on to do well at many of the events following the World Championships last year,
I'll be honest
it
with
was
you.
running on borrowed time. The DLC for Pokemon Scarlet and Violet arrived soon after Worlds, and though Landorus could withstand the addition of Ogerpon in the Teal Mask, the second DLC would serve as a death knell. With the Indigo Disc, Incineroar was back in the game. Which brings us to now, with Landorus performing poorly at every event
and it's our top 10
Incineroar's reintroduction.
top 5 even.
I should say Landorus Therian performing badly. In some bizarre twist of fate, Landorus Incarnate has actually been doing quite well. It's a special attacker, which means it isn't slowed down by Incineroar, and with Sheer Force, Life Orb, and Terra Poison, Sludge Bomb adds great additional coverage to Earth Power, threatening lots of meta Pokemon like Incineroar, Rillaboom, Entei, Gouging Fire, Ogerpon, Raging Bolt, and more. It also naturally
I love how Pokemon fans figure out a way to make something work. Like, for the most part, like, if you're not using Urshifu on your team, you're screwed. If you're not using like Kingambit, you're not using Incineroar on your team, you're kind of screwed. But if you can figure out a way to make things work without using those overpowered mons, kudos for you.
Something that Landorus Therian doesn't share. Turns out those 10 speed points matter more than you might expect.
It's the reason why Garchomp was not used. Mega Garchomp was not used compared to Garchomp because its 10 speed points got lowered from Garchomp to Mega Garchomp. So yeah, it does.
Any of this helps Landorus Therian. It seems like nowadays, if you want a Pokemon with Intimidate, you should use Incineroar. And if you want a ground-type offensive Pokemon, Landorus Incarnate is a better bet. Which begs the question, is Landorus Therian gone for good? On the one hand, I don't think Landorus T will ever be mainstream again as long as Incineroar is around. The gap between them is just too large, and if Dynamax wasn't enough to let Landorus overtake Incineroar, it's hard to imagine anything else will be. But Landorus still has a lot going for it, and I'm sure that on the right team at the right time, it can still be a great Pokemon. And of course, there's always the question of future Pokemon games. There's no guarantee that Incineroar will be in every game going forward. Though, given how much the Pokemon Company seems to love it, I wouldn't bet on Incineroar getting left behind.
Nah, probably won't.
Even without Incineroar, I don't think Landorus will ever dominate the way it once did. There's just too much counterplay to intimidate between the new items, the new Pokemon, and the old ability changes. But maybe that's okay. Landorus had its time in the spotlight, and even though it's not there anymore, we can still appreciate it for what it was. A strong, reliable,
So people
good,
actually use Defiant King Gambit over Supreme Overlord King Gambit, which is pretty surprising to me. Because that's so most people would bring King Gambit last, but just because if you bring it first, never thought of it like that. I thought Supreme Overlord was just not overpowered, but super used. So people just use that. So people just use that over any other ability he has. But anyways, guys, thanks for watching. Subscribe to Wolfie. I'll try to remember to leave his links in the comments. Go to his sponsor. Click on the link on his website. I'll see you guys next time. Peace.